Good morning, good afternoon. It's what is it, July 18th, 2020. And I'm Kevin Ryan here with Tom Ryan and Barbara Engelhardt. And this is what, the 26th or 27th episode of Tom Ryan Remembers. And today we're going to talk about economics, basically, and saving money. So,
Well,
Tom, yep.
once I said, I'm a teacher and now you're a teacher. And very few teachers I know, their children became teachers. It's just almost unheard of. It's the first step. But Kevin says he's not a teacher because he's a professor. And professors are not teachers, they are facilitators or wisdom droppers or whatever they are. Anyway, they're not teachers, and they don't like that name. Well, one reason is the teachers are very poorly paid, always have been. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some say it's June, July, and August that we get that off, and so we don't get paid a full year. We can take our pay in 9 months or 12, but we're really only working 9 months a year. Well, that isn't true. And I had to work summers, partly because I had 4 kids in a row. Kevin was born 9.5 months after we got married, and Dan was born less than a year later, and Marie born a year later after that. So we had, and then there was a little break in there, and then Ginger was born. So I had 4 kids to support, and Marilyn did not want, even though she had a nurse's certificate, she did not want to, you do nursing, but she wanted to raise the kids and be at home. So I think that was great. We never had a babysitter, daycare, and one of us was with the kids all the time. So that limited income. And one of the ways that teachers, men teachers, can make more than women is by being coaches. Well, I wasn't an athlete and I wasn't a coach. So that when I was in training at the University of Illinois to be a teacher, I was told that the only way to get a good teaching job was to be broadly trained. Don't just take U.S. history. Anyway, the coaches have got that all tied up. The coaches love U.S. history. They can just tell stories. Sometimes they're football stories and basketball. Sometimes they're history stories. And they teach U.S. history. So you need to be prepared to teach more than just U.S. history. So I did that. I took courses in geography and economics and political science and history and world history as well as U.S. history. So I could teach most anything in the social studies department. So I got my first job and I made $1,800 a year in Chillicothe, Illinois. And with, I was about to have 4 kids, and that just wasn't enough. I had to work summers. I had to get jobs. I would carry mail in the summer, U.S. mail. And so I didn't have summers off. But I liked that idea, and I liked teaching, and I liked learning. So I looked at the situation, and I decided that the best thing for me to do, well, first of all, teachers were all paid the same. The only raise you got was on the index. Every year you got a raise just because you put in another year. And so they couldn't tell a good teacher from a bad teacher. It was very hard to measure. There were no obvious measuring sticks. So they would say, if you have a master's degree, you get more than somebody that has a bachelor's degree. And then they began to add, after the master's degree, if you went to school during the summer, you'd get another raise for every time you went to school. So I looked at, and I said, I like going to school. I'll go to school in the summer. My first summer, Marilyn stayed home with her mother in Waukegan, and I went to Purdue University, paid for by General Electric, a scholarship. And it was a wonderful summer. I got all excited about economics and decided that's what I really wanted to do. And then I as the summers came by, I went to Michigan State to learn about geography. I went to Oneonta, New York to learn about how to be a teacher of economics. Now, eventually, when Sputnik went up, the Russians beat us into space, and that was an embarrassment. And they said, why were the Russians beating us into space with spaceships? And the reason was given was our kids were not trained well in math and science. So the federal government started a whole program to train high school teachers to do a better job of teaching math and science. So our science teachers would go off to these summers, all expenses paid, and then they would get a raise when they came back because they got more credits. And not only did they get their annual yearly raise, they got the raise because they had more credits. And those raises stayed with the rest of your career. Well, we social studies teachers weren't included, but eventually we snuck in with geography, and we could get geography as a science. And so I went to Michigan State in geography, and then they kept broadening it, and finally economics was included. And I would go to these summer schools. One in Purdue was sponsored by General Electric, but after that they were sponsored by the U.S. Uncle Sam paid our tuition and expenses, and it was really a good deal, and I enjoyed it. And sometimes we'd camp and be near the university in a campground, and the kids would be there. And sometimes I'd go off on my own. I went to UCLA too, went to Colorado State University. These are summers. So I got credits that way. I had a master's degree that I got on the GI Bill, paid for by Uncle Sam. And then I got these summer credits, and I had a master's degree plus a whole year worth of credits. And so I was at the top of the salary schedule. And then as time went on, the idea was teachers weren't very well paid, but if you work your way, if you stick it out, by the time you retire, you'll make about twice as much as you were making when you started, which is still wasn't enough really. But we had that. Then our state had money, and the school districts had to live on the property tax, which is a very poor tax to raise money. But the state had the income tax, and they decided to give us a pension, a really good pension. And so I had that to look forward to. So all in all, it was a good economic deal, as well as something I enjoyed. And I taught economics. The state had required in Illinois that we teach consumer economics at the high school level at least 9 weeks. And we worked it into our economics class. And we didn't call it economics because really we called it buymanship, because economics, that's how to keep the government going through a recession. And Karl Marx said that the weakness of the capitalism was downturns, ups and downs in the economy. We called them crashes, panics, recessions, depressions. We gave them different names. And they would come along and they really punished the poor, and everybody. And even when our two presidents came in, Herbert Hoover was running against FDR, 1932. Neither president had any idea of how to get the government, how to save us from the Depression, how to get out of the Depression, how to end it. And that's all come more recently. In recent economics, most people in government now know how to get a recession slowed down and not last so long, at least. And so that's what we would teach in economics, that sort of thing. How banks, there's a central bank, and how they can be a part of keeping the economy on an even keel. But consumer economics, we call buymanship, was so these kids could, you have a question? No, okay.
No, just.
Okay.
Yeah.
So buymanship was how to get the most out of your money, how to live a good life on the cheap. But one of the things we pointed out was being cheap is not being economical. Just squeezing every nickel out of going to the grocery store and buying bargains and cutting out coupons. That's what we mean by being economical. To be a good buyer, you had to take a lot more into account than price. And one of the most important things we taught is if you're going to be good at this thing called buymanship, you want to go beyond price and bargaining, buying bargains. And instead, there was the word called PER, P-E-R. And you had to figure out how much it costs per. Like, how much does it cost per day? How much does it cost per week? How much does it cost per gallon? How many miles per gallon do you get out of your gas? And that was much more important than how many gallons your gas tank will hold or how much the car costs.
Well, I remember we had a little booklet every time we went to the gas station. We always had to figure out how many miles per gallon we got on every fill up. Yes.
Yeah, Kevin was really good at that. He could do it in his head. I said, "How do you do that, Kevin?" He would just look at the numbers and divide, how much we were getting, how many miles per gallon we were getting, and he could do that in his head. I always said, "You should have become a mathematician." You said, "Well, I was good at computation, but not at mathematics." And so that's the kind of difference. Mathematics is more than computation. You can get a adding machine to do calculation, but mathematics goes beyond that, and economics is like that too. In fact, economics was so complicated that they didn't teach it until the second year in college, along with physics. Physics was a second year. Kids weren't mature enough to handle physics or economics until they're at least sophomores in college. So here we were trying to teach it in high school. So we had to get it. It was not easy teaching something that complex. And high school students, we'd say, are only interested in sex, cars, and sports. And if you can't connect it with sex, cars, or sports, forget it. They're not with you. They're in some la-la land and not even listening to what you're saying.
That's curious because my students these days here in Japan are not interested in any of those three things.
Those three things are not, well, they sure were in our high school.
Yeah.
What are they interested in, Kevin?
Oh gosh, let's see.
What else is there?
Fashion, buying things, and food. Yeah.
Oh, food.
And clothing, huh?
Yeah,
Right.
clothing, right.
And hairstyles. And, yes, I guess. Well, it keeps them from getting pregnant during their college years, I guess,
Yeah.
which is a big problem here. That's the end of somebody's career if they get pregnant while they're in college and never finish college. They're kind of doomed. But anyway, that's another thing we can talk about. But
Yeah.
being wise and getting the most for your money requires a use of the per. And we take buying a house and renting a house, or buying a car and renting a car. And which is the most economical? Well, you have to figure out cost, not just price. Price tells you very little about what is the best bargain. And I always tried to connect those two. And then I read, I did go to UCLA for a summer to learn about consumer economics and how to teach it. But that was late in my career, and I just enjoyed being in Los Angeles for a summer, and it was paid for by somebody else. And I did do a 2-week playing in Colorado State, sponsored by the Robert Taft Foundation, and they paid my way. But during most of the time I taught, I read Money Magazine, cover to cover, every month.
Jane Bryant Quinn.
And
right?
Jane Bryant Quinn was my guru. She just retired recently from writing for ARP, magazine, and she would write for Newsweek and have a column in Newsweek every week. And I read Newsweek and Time cover to cover every week. And that's where I got a lot of my consumer education, was from magazines. And I applied it into the classroom. We taught how to buy life insurance. And we would invite speakers to come in. We'd tell the kids they could get extra credit if they invited their father or their neighbor or their boss to come in and talk about what he did. And it was a popular program. These bosses and neighbors and fathers just loved doing that. They said, nobody cares about what I do. And here you are, an audience, you'd want to hear what I do every day. And they enjoyed it very much as we did. So it was good public relations. And it carried on into the civics class where we would invite people. So,
Jane Bryant Quinn.
Jane Bryant Quinn. She was, when she started, she was a single mother, and she hadn't any education in consumer economics at all. She did it all by research, and she could really take complicated ideas and make them sound easy to understand. So that was her skill as a journalist, not so much as an economist, but that's what we did. We had to take complicated ideas and boil them down to where high school kids could understand them. And
Right.
Since they weren't married and they weren't struggling with these ideas, their parents were, it was hard to get them interested in this. They would need it later.
Right.
But right now, they were interested in other things.
So there's two ideas that I can think of: supply and demand, and marginal utility.
Yeah.
And
Right.
were there any others that you taught in that class?
Well, yeah, the idea of supply and demand was that your wages, or how much things cost, they weren't necessarily worth. People would say it's worth something. I'd say worth, that's not an economics term. We have to say supply and demand is price, and you get the price for your labor is based on how many teachers are out there in the market and how many teachers they need. Or same with cars. And they'd have some years in a recession, there'd be a big surplus of cars. They'd pile up in parking lots. They could produce them, but there weren't any customers for them. And I remember a motto they had in the 60s, you auto buy now. And then it was sponsored by Detroit, that you ought to go out and buy a car now because you can get a real good bargain. And it'll help the recession be ended. We can call our workers back to work, and there'll be money in the economy again. So supply and demand is a very important concept, and you got to get away from worth. Something has intrinsic worth. That, I don't know where that comes from. I guess artists like to think that way. They paint a painting, and it took them a year to paint, and they think it's worth $1 million, but it's only going to get what the market will, it's auctioned off. In a way, everything is auctioned off, and it goes to the highest bidder. And whether it's your labor or your merchandise they're selling or things you're buying. So don't think they have worth. Think of that maybe you can buy it. If you wait for a recession, you can get it cheap. And if you buy a house at the wrong time, when the economy is up and the house prices are high, and then they go down again, that you got it. You didn't get a bargain. You want to buy a house in a downturn when people are desperate to sell their houses and nobody has any money, and you have savings, then you can buy a house. And saving, of course, was another thing on how much you get with your savings. Investing.
What about the term value?
Value.
Is that like worth?
Value is like worth. It depends on what people value, what they think it's worth, what they're willing to pay for it is, I guess, value. But it doesn't necessarily, maybe something's a fad and everybody wants them and during the fad, and then the fad's over and you can't get rid of them, you can't give them away.
Okay.
So a thing does not have intrinsic value except if people endow it with that.
Okay. Marginal utility, of course, is like if you eat one candy bar, you enjoy it. But if you eat three candy bars, then you don't enjoy
and the
it.
candy bars are all equal, but the marginal value to you is less and less as you buy more and more. And probably it never goes to zero unless, I guess, if you eat enough candy bars, you get sick to your stomach. Maybe you've gone into the negative range. But that was a marginal value as how much is another one? How much is another one worth?
Yeah.
And having a second home, for example, the second home isn't worth as much as the first one.
So you would teach,
and so on.
You would teach this consumerism and these basic economic ideas, and you learned about those in the summer, and your pay went to you said the top level for a teacher.
I made when I retired, and that was 30 years ago. I retired at 57 because we had a wonderful pension in the state of Illinois. And they had too many teachers, and so they offered us to retire early on a full pension. And now I get $40,000 a year on my pension. And my first year, I got $1,800. Now, there was inflation, of course, and inflation is something you need to teach too. And things go on up in price pretty much over the years, sometimes faster, sometimes slower. And that inflation affects the value of the money that you get. But I'm still getting $40,000 a year in retirement, and I have been for 30 years, and that's more than I earned when I was teaching. My pension pays me more per year in the 30 years of my retirement than the 30 years of my teaching.
You were able to retire early because at that time they wanted you out because you earned so much they could replace you with two teachers, right? So, and it was like 53 or something like that.
Right, they could hire two new teachers for the price of me. So they offered me money, the school district and the state, and I had to put in a little money, a few $100s, and I got to retire 3 years early, 57. Teachers retired at 60 normally. And I remember one of our teachers who was still teaching past 60. He said that, there's only 2% of the teachers in Illinois who are still teaching after they're 60 years old. So that was one of the good things about teaching. You could retire early and not have to wait till 65 when your Social Security came due.
And one of the reasons why Illinois is going bankrupt.
That's one of the reasons that they have billions of dollars. Last year, they put $4 billion into the retirement fund. Now, that includes state policemen and federal and state workers, not just teachers, but most of it is teachers, and both elementary and high school. And the state has promised us, our teachers union, the most thing they did, they never did get us to get a raise. The people that paid property tax just would not pass bond issues to give teachers a raise. So the state, they'd go down to Springfield and lobby the state legislators that they had all these teachers votes, and they would deliver these teachers votes to these guys if they do something for the teachers. Well, one thing they could do was make our pension better. They kept adding things to the pension. And finally, it got to the point where some say it's going to bankrupt the state of Illinois. And I'm almost 90. I don't think it will in my lifetime. But I think it's a danger to new teachers. And there's a shortage of teachers, always has been. And some superintendents in little rural towns say, if they can breathe, I put them in the classroom. Anybody can, if they've got a college degree, can teach
Supply
Anybody can
demand.
teach. That's another one. That they say anybody can teach. That's easy to do.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so they would hire people in their rural schools. And now they're telling teachers that they can collect the pension and teach at the same time because they need them in these rural schools. As there's such a shortage of teachers, even in Illinois, with their generous pension and salaries, or more generous salaries than they have in other states. We
Right.
would bring teachers into Illinois from Iowa and other states
Oh, wow. Yeah. Hey,
come
this,
to
this
get more
looks like
money.
a good place to come to the end of an episode
All
after
right,
retirement.
all
Okay.
right,
Sounds good.
sounds good. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thanks.